Hey guys, how's it going? It is I, the real Randy Chavez, coming at you today with a update video. It's a podcast number 150 with Alfred Kahn, who is on via voice chat today. How are you?
Thank you. Fine, Randy. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So I just got done watching the first part of your podcast with Comics and Crypto. You've been doing a lot of these interviews lately with Comics and Crypto and then with Lori Renner over on Spaces. Why have you chosen now to come out and start either marketing yourself or doing all these things?
That's a really good question. What I realized, I've never done that. In all my years of actually, being in the business, I sort of took a back seat in terms of my own persona, right? So I used what I was accomplishing to take the framework of what I was doing. And then I realized that there's an opportunity for me to really get a lot more notification, a lot more, information, and possibly, and meet a lot more people, right?
Yeah.
I never was really on even, the Facebooks or anything of that ilk. So I decided that I should do it. Also, there's a lot of new projects I'm working on, that certainly might be, further moved along by that input. So that's what I decided to do, and I give credit to my better half, who is telling me that you don't do enough personal personal PR, and I said to her, well, that certainly cuts both ways, right? Of course.
Yeah.
But I think she's right. So I have decided to to go a little more public with things that I'm doing, and hopefully people will enjoy it, and hopefully people will be interested in some of the things that we're up to.
Yeah, everyone has thoroughly enjoyed all of your appearances, whether it be on the Twitter Spaces with Veve, with Lori Brenner, the community updates. But this isn't your first time in the limelight. Many moons ago, you were actually on Letterman because of the Cabbage Patch Kid craze. Can you tell us about that? Because I couldn't find any video of it.
Oh, I have. It's so funny. It's funny you mentioned that. There's a documentary that I shot about, I guess, maybe 7 months ago, which is the true story of the Cabbage Patch Kids. And it was shot by a documentary company. This is what actually got me thinking about why I should be doing more. And the whole idea was the backstory behind the Cabbage Patch Kids. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned, that I was on, all kinds of not quiz shows, all kinds of, television shows. I was on Letterman. I was on Ted Koppel and Nightline. I was on all the news shows because of Cabbage Patch Kids, which is going back now, believe it or not, 40 years ago. It's unbelievable. So this particular company found all those videos. They found everything that I had told them about, and as part of the documentary, they have the Letterman footage, they have the Ted Koppel footage, they have a lot of footage that, in some cases, how'd they find it? Because the internet at that point didn't exist, right? So how would they find this stuff? So I was really very excited that that's the case. And I got a lot of, that documentary is now being shopped, obviously. So it'll end up probably on one of the streamers. Then I got a call from another company that wanted to do a story on Pokemon. And I passed on that one because I didn't feel I just didn't have a good vibe about it. And that still may be coming out, but it's nothing. I'm not really going to be involved in it. And then there's a third one where they want to do a story on what I've been doing lately.
Okay.
Take it from Pokemon forward, and of course that goes to a lot of the things that are new that we're playing with at the moment. So, what the hey, I'm in the back nine, and might as well have as much fun as you possibly can in the latter part of your life, right?
Yeah, agreed. So speaking of going back, 40 years ago, in the 80s when Cabbage Patch Kids was involved, you were recorded in an interview. It might have been lately, but this is from many years ago, where you were asked about Eddie Goldfarb, and you hold him in such high esteem, and the words "fucking legend," end quote, were thrown around. Tell me, who is this generation's Eddie Goldfarb?
That's a great question. Well, I think when you look at Eddie Goldfarb, of course, he was a toy inventor, right? And he just he's still alive. He's like 90 something. He's great.
Yeah.
And who is this? Who's the next Eddie Goldfarb? Well, I think you look at amazing people who've done amazing things, and not necessarily things who have been commercially successful, but have made differences in our lives. And the hackneyed answer would be, a guy like, the guy that we bought Twitter, or the guy that, that does other things like that. But I think I rather concentrate on people who have really worked to do something for the better of humanity. I think, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife gives away billions of dollars very unceremoniously, right, to different charities. And we were lucky that she gave us a big grant for my charity. And that's a hero. That's a hero. That's a hero. And I think I think the other thing that I think is important, it's people who help shape your lives. I mean, think about what has shaped your life, in terms of whether it be your career or whether it be how you feel about different things. And I think those are the kinds of people that I believe are legends, or heroes, at least in somebody's eyes. And I'm very blessed that. And remember, none of the things that I did them by myself. I mean, you have to understand that. I think I'm the instigator in some of those issues, but it still requires a team to do these things. And, so I certainly don't want to give the impression that everything I did, was done in a vacuum. It wasn't. Yeah. And then the fact remains, what ended up happening, though, was that I identified these things. I was able to identify them. And then I understood what had to be done to try and get them to be popular. Of course, who would know, whether or not they're going to be popular? You're never going to know anything. Yeah. So I think that's what think about when I think about, people that were, George Lucas, a guy like that, or somebody like a very creative and very, very, interesting character. Steve Jobs, of course, with think about what happened with this phone. I mean, out of the top 20 new companies in the last 15 years, they all rely on the phone, right?
They do.
So that was a game changer. And so I think, and I get a big thrill on people saying to me, well, I was part of their childhood because they grew up with a lot of things that we did. That is, has a two-way cut, right? Shit, I'm getting old. And two, it is nice to hear that. It's nice to hear that there was something about these things that made them they appreciated it in their childhood, and they brought that forward, to their adult lives, and possibly to their own children too.
So you've obviously been doing this for quite a long time. One of the things I hesitant to ask, but I know it'd be a disaster not to ask. What's one of the craziest stories in how you secured one of these licenses, whether it's for 4Kids, whether it's for Crane, whether it's for Veve? What is the craziest story of you either whining and dining or having to throw your weight around in securing these licenses?
Oops, that's my dog. Sorry.
Puppy.
Here's the doorbell. Let me think about that for a second.
Okay.
Well, I think, the biggest problem in terms of, look, everything is hard. Nothing is easy, especially when you're talking about something that's relatively new. But I think the one that was the most difficult was acquiring the rights to Pocket Monsters out of Japan. And the rationale is because the Japanese didn't believe that Pocket Monsters would work outside of Japan. They just didn't believe it. And because remember, that original game was a role-playing game, and kids in Japan had to read, off the Game Boy screen, and then they would type in their response. Of course, that migrated to action games, etc. But they felt very strongly that American kids don't read. They really had that, perception that American kids don't read, and therefore that would be difficult situation to get established. So it was not just a function of trying to get them to give me the rights. It was, how do I protect them against the disaster? Because Nintendo, was certainly, as most Japanese companies, very much concerned about their image, about especially their gravitas. And so we came up with the idea, after a long time of negotiation, that the whole entire launch would be under the term Under 4 Kids Entertainment, and that Nintendo to the outside world would be a licensee. So bring in Nintendo's, video games, Pokemon video games, and also then the idea that the card game would be a separate entity, which it was. It was a license to, at that time, Wizards of the Coast, and that everything we did migrated towards 4 Kids, and that the idea was that if it was a bomb, Nintendo would go, "Your fault,"
Yeah.
And of course, as luck would have it, so it was a very difficult negotiation. And but ultimately, also it comes down to money. There's also a money function there. So that was really difficult. And many times I went back and forth to Japan to try and legislate that particular situation.
So obviously, I've been doing this for quite a long time. Got a bunch of stories. There is I think it was either late '90s or early 2000s. There was an Eminem and Dr. Dre song, and there was a line in it that goes, "I was strapped with gats while you were cuddling a Cabbage Patch," obviously referencing Cabbage Patch Kids. What were some other media outlets, whether it be movie, political speeches, or TV shows, that you've had some of your licensing IP referenced?
Wow. Well, I think the thing that's most interesting was that, excuse me, I'm eating while I'm talking to you. That, which is really rude, but I apologize. These things became iconic in other mediums, So notice, for instance, Cabbage Patch Kids was on the cover of most of the magazines, and of course, Pikachu was the Man of the Year on Time magazine, So there was a lot of that transpired. That was, kind of funny, in some level, and that they were, established as a real iconic movement. And think about it, think about this. This is the thing that's most interesting. Of course, remember, I also did James Bond too, and I had a lot of fun with that. That was a lot of fun. Of course, I was just I was the licensing agent for that. And I'll tell you a funny story about that one.
Okay.
I represented, excuse me, I represented them for a number of years, primarily when Pierce Brosnan was James Bond.
Yeah.
Okay. So I got this idea that we should make a video game out of, their one-person shooter, which was part of the GoldenEye movie. And I brought it to Nintendo because I was their agent. And they did do it, and it became a hugely successful video game. And I remember Nintendo said to me, "What else you got? What else do you think we should do?" And I went, I was looking at the world at that time. I said, "We should do Harry Potter." Harry Potter was just coming into play. And I had to go to Warner Brothers and convince them, which was not easy, they should give the rights to Harry Potter to Nintendo as opposed to giving it to Atari. Because Atari would be, was the number one video game in the world.
Yeah.
And Nintendo was doing pretty well. Of course, you had also on television at that time too. You had Mattel, and they said, "Why shouldn't we give it to Atari? They have the biggest installed base." And they said, "Look, it's probably the least well-defined system in terms of graphics, in terms of all the other things that go along with it. And what I'll do for you, is that we'll get Nintendo will really pump up Nintendo because they don't take many licenses. Will do a great job with Harry Potter." Well, yeah. It took a long time, and I finally convinced them that was a great idea. We negotiated a deal which was insane, and then I was going to fly to California to meet the Nintendo General Counsel to sign the contract with Warner Brothers. Well, The night before I'm going to leave, I get a call from the chairman of Nintendo, not him specifically, but one of his people. We're not doing any more licenses. We're not going to renew James Bond. We certainly don't want to do Harry Potter. We're only going to develop our own characters from this point forward.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to develop a character for our game, if somebody wanted to use a license for our game, they would be the one that'd have to do it. So that deal went south. And boy, was Warner Brothers annoyed. But we did get Electronic Arts, if you remember, picked up Pokemon, and also picked up GoldenEye, and picked up Harry Potter. Yeah. So but Nintendo's strategy, which you have to understand, interesting, an IP strategy, right? Was that we're going to create our own IP, and if we don't own it, we ain't going to do it. And that's the same strategy that Activision has done. If you think about what Activision has done, they don't license anything. They basically develop, Call of Duty and all the other things that they do as video games, and they own them outright. And I think there's an interesting message to that. I don't think that works in every category, obviously, because if you're in the apparel business, you cannot possibly have enough licenses to expurgate. But in the case of a technology company, we're going to develop our own IP, and we are not going to, do anything that we don't have command and control of. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think looking at Nintendo today, they certainly didn't make the bad decision, did they?
Correct. Many of my tattoos are Nintendo based. I'm a big Nintendo person. But you mentioned Harry Potter. We have a Harry Potter actress in the audience. Fanny Carbonell played. Yeah, she played Mrs. Goldstein for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Oh wow! Congratulations, Fanny. Nice to see you. The whole thing with Harry Potter, which was incredible, still is incredible, was that really good IP has a tendency to last. And has a tendency, because think about it, how much IP does really last over time? You might have heard of it, but is it relevant all the time? Like you hear about older IP, but is it that big a deal today? But you think about Harry Potter or Nintendo or Cabbage Patch or Ninja Turtles or obviously certainly Pokemon, which is the number one license in the world, is selling. Number one license in the world. That has a staying power, and the staying power was based on a commitment to constantly update it, to constantly do new things, to constantly create new games, to constantly create new products, and constantly promote. And that's what the beauty of what has to be happen when you're developing, IP that you want to have last over time.
So funny you mentioned staying power and promotion. So there's something I wanted to mention, as head of licensing for Comey and Veve. Back in the day, Cabbage Patch Kids had a nationwide campaign with, like you said, magazines and commercials and adoption centers. So do you think that Veve might have a similar campaign? Or do you think that because we're in the age of influencers, they might only need like a dozen or so people to be able to post tweets and post Instagram stories? Which do you think they'll go? Or which direction do you hope they'll go?
Well, again, I can't speak for them, right? Because I don't get involved. My position with them was really bring them licenses, right? And actually, once I brought them licenses, they basically had had to run with them. You follow?
Yeah.
I think this is a very complicated question. I think that a lot of what is tied into NFTs is crypto, and crypto obviously is having a problem at the moment. Which is not unusual for things that are new. They tend to go from, sometimes they have huge successes and then they calm down a little bit. And of course, we've had some issues with some of the crypto that's been out there that has, or companies that have dealt in crypto. Yeah. But I think a lot of the, the baseline of Veve and a lot of these NFT companies is got a piece in crypto. And a lot of the people that are interested in these things are also interested in crypto.
Yeah.
What I've said before, and I still feel that's the case, you have to drive above that. You have to go out and get Joe Common Man, who may not be a crypto enthusiast,
no,
but could be interested in collecting or is interested in collecting. Look, you go to go to Comic-Con, you go to all these different things, a lot of things are collected.
Yeah.
Millions of things are collected. And whether it be Pokemon cards or whether it be baseball cards or whether it be, Funko action figures, etc. It's a whole litany of things. So the question is, how do you get more people to look at, and I don't like to call them NFTs, frankly. I want to get rid of that term. The digital collectibles. The digital collectibles. And how do you get people to look at digital collectibles in a broader way than they would be looking at it if it's only connected, if the only reason for buying them was that they hope they go up in value and then they resell them, for additional, revenue, which is not, look, I'm not adverse to that either, but I believe that, it's the installed base that has to get bigger. And that, I think that's what they have. I think certainly they're working in that direction. They're working on how they can do that.
So speaking of licenses, currently right now in this, recession, bear market, there's many other companies that are bleeding cash that do have really good licenses. And with Veve, that is averaging about $1 million in gem sales each week, they're pretty flush with cash. So do you think right now is a good time to go after other licenses, or do you think we should wait a few months, wait for max pain to really set in, and then go after licenses that way? Or do you think Veve should just buy other companies outright?
Well, that's a good question. Again, I'm not in their internal meetings, so I can't tell you what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Here's my feeling. What happens sometimes, there's two ways to look at things. Sometimes if there's a market reaction that you can't control, are you better sitting it out a little bit, or is that the time to strike and try and take market share from some of your competitors?
Yeah.
That's really the question. My feeling on it is that the crypto situation will adjust, at some level. And that crypto will adjust because there's still going to be a reason for crypto. Okay. So my feeling, it might take a period of time for that to adjust. And the most important thing for Veve or any company that's going through a category that's having a little bit of a, downturn is to save cash.
Yeah.
Save cash and don't blow cash. So, and also, how many drops can you do if the market is not allowing you to do those drops? They're not going as fast as they were at one point in time.
Yeah.
So I think it's a game of, doing what's appropriate relative to keeping yourself, absolutely, flush, and also planning for the future. And I think one of the things I think Veve's doing that I really like is the Veveverse. I think that one is, which is still, ways away, but that one sort of brings back the storytelling angle of this, because instead of relying on everybody else's story, you start to build your own story. And that's the secret of IP, right? The secret of what made Harry Potter successful, or what makes other things, because the IP is built. And I think with the Veveverse, they have an opportunity to build their own IP, which again will be inhabited by licenses, but the ultimate umbrella of this will be, their own creativity in terms of how they marginalize, how they, develop the Veveverse. So again, I'm not in the meetings. I don't, I talk to David, but I'm not running the company. So I don't feel that I'm, they know what they're up against, and they have to deal with what they deal with. And I think we should be really grateful that it appears that they are financially solid, and that they are hopefully will not have the problems that some of these other cryptocurrency companies have had, which have been, spending inordinate amounts of money or spending money atrociously. You look at the story behind, the one that just went really mahua, and he was buying real estate. He was lending, his customers' money to somebody else, which is like, did the customer know they were doing that? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. That to me would be a terrible breach of trust, right? If they're trying to act like a bank, and yet they didn't have the regulations or the actual controls that they needed to try and do that. So I think that I think right now being cautious is a good thing. But it doesn't mean if you have a great opportunity, you don't grab it. You know, you follow. But I'm not sure I would spend inordinate amounts of money unless we could do it, unless those licenses could be dropped successfully, and that we would have the ability to increase the obviously the amount of people that are interested in the category.
Agreed. Back at New York Comic Con last month, you had mentioned that there was going to be another game that would be available, and it would have to do with Omi. And I think that was the game that was advertised at DCon. Was that the game that you were talking about? Did you see that game?
I wasn't talking about a game specifically. I think what I was talking about, the idea of you getting more utility into the Omi token, right?
Okay.
I think that gaming was one of the areas that we all thought would add another tranche to that particular situation. So I don't know if I don't think I knew what the game was. I know. Okay. I just don't think I knew it. So
you have mentioned before that video games aren't necessarily for you, but because the minds of the younger generations and that kids live online, where do you expect millennials and Gen Zers to take gaming? Do you expect it to be in the metaverse? Do you expect it to be a little more micro, just on their phones, headsets? Where do you see it going?
Let me give it to you my own personal feeling, right? Mm-hmm. My personal feeling is that gaming is an integral part of what we do. Okay, you look at the numbers of how many people play video games on a worldwide basis; it's astronomical. It's astronomical. Yeah. And then if you look at esports, which has now become a really successful sporting model. Even colleges all have esports teams. So I think the idea of gaming constantly is a constant. And I think that obviously, the metaverse or any metaverse to be successful, it's going to have gaming elements in it. And, how clever can you get? How clever can you get? And because I think people, love video games. They really do. When I say it's unfair to say I don't love video games, I love the study of video games. I love to understand, what people are doing and why they do it, and I think, what we see in this world, which is good and bad, a lot of people bury themselves into these different worlds, and I don't know why they do it. I mean, do they do it because they're not comfortable in their own world or their own skin, or they just want to get more adventures, in terms of these additional outlets? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that when you go to Comic-Con, everybody's dressed like their favorite, hero. It's like the old story. It's like with the influencers. Everybody wants to be. It seems like everybody wants to be, rich and famous, or everybody wants to have a certain amount of, appeal, and they don't think they have it in their own skin in some cases, right? I would love to see people try and develop their own innate skill sets and see if they could become something that's not necessarily based on a false narrative, right? I mean, the thing that worries me is that one of the best books I read, which was unfortunately not a great movie, was Ready Player One. The book was great. The movie was not so great.
Okay.
But I worked with Spielberg on it before, and not that it had anything to do with this. But many years ago, he had asked me to look at some stuff he was working on, and because he was looking to try and get into the licensing business, right? So I remember he would call me up and he said, "I have a new movie." And we did when I was at Coleco, we licensed E.T., right? And he told me you're not gonna get the artwork until the E.T. movie comes out.
Yeah.
I went, that means the products will be out a year after the movie. I said, Stephen, I think you can't do it. So he finally agreed to give us, artwork on E.T., and of course it was incredibly successful. And then he called me up and said, "I have a new movie that I want you to see because I want you to tell me what the merchandising opportunities were." So I flew out to California, and it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it was he uses a place called RKO Studios, where he does all the sound dubbing. And it's a huge studio, big, tremendous screen, like a movie theater, but two seats. But the rest of the whole place is covered in video games. I mean, he's a video game nut, coin-op games, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd sit there and watch the movie. And after the movie, he said, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What are you going to license? Richard Dreyfuss? I mean, what are you going to license? The Mountain? I didn't see, because ultimately in a licensing program, you develop something because there's a play pattern that you want to emulate in the licensing program. So the play pattern was not clear here what the play pattern was. It was just a close encounter of a third kind. But was that enough to drive a licensing program? My feeling was it wasn't. And of course, it was a great movie, did great, but the licensing program, I think, was never really that, intense. It was a beautiful movie. Whereas E.T., was an incredible licensing experience, because what was it? How could you not want to get E.T. home? It's like finding a stray dog. It's like, wow, let me put that, let's get that stray dog home. And that's what I think was the most interesting part of that. And I think without great stories or great, I call them play patterns, it's hard to establish some of these things.
So you've mentioned IP a bunch of times, and recently, starting at San Diego Comic-Con, Veve decided to experiment with some of their own IP with the gold and silver Veve logo. The way they handed it out was very similar to Pokemon cards, at least the trophy Pokemon cards, in that you had to be at a specific place at a specific time and do a specific task, and then you got the card for free, which, like most trophy Pokemon cards, are handed out for free. So what do you make of this move, and how often should they give away or sell their IP, or should they be able to make their own characters?
Well, obviously, there's a couple of different ways to look at it, right? Certainly, I think there could be a mix. And again, I haven't spoken to them about it, so I want to make sure I'm clarifying. I'm not giving you advice. I'm not doing anything. Yeah. So I think there should be a mix. I think you look. There's certain properties you'd love to have because they have such credibility, but why can't you develop some of your own IP and try and establish it as well? So you have an opportunity to have something that you own, in perpetuity, and that possibly could have a value story that helps build up the value of your enterprise, right? So I think it really is I think it's something they should look at. I can't tell you what those properties should be.
Yeah.
But hey, I think there's a lot of interest, in VV, so maybe they're interested in having those types of situations. But I do think that a smart company develops things that they both own and they license. So they have things that they've licensed in, and there's certain things that they own, and that you then have a mix, and you're not as vulnerable to to licensors, which are difficult today. There's so many, they cut the onion, so many different patterns. So I think it's a combination.
Agreed. Speaking of Ready Player One, you mentioned before, Fanny Carbona, who had played as a Harry Potter actress, was also in Ready Player One as an extra. So, whoa. Yeah, she's all over the place.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Congratulations. So yeah, I think the thing I liked about that book, and again, I'm not denigrating the movie. I just felt
of course,
was that when push came to shove, the intimacy of real people meeting real people was, I think the inherent reason for being a human being. And yet, if you're only going to live through an avatar for your whole life, or you're going to try and, of course, the new term ghosting, or where no one knows who they're talking to, really, I think that's a real shame. And I think it's a real shame. And I think we as people need interaction with people. We need to have that interaction. And I think one of the problems we have today in the world, there isn't enough interaction amongst different groups, right? We have all these different political situations that are, truly disturbing. So I've got a bad eye on a cold. So you got a combination today. But I hope that people start to realize that if they use this material to garner relationships, that are real relationships and real experiences, I think you can have both. You can have your cake and eat it too. But I think if you just rely on being in a totally fabricated environment, do you miss out on some of the real situations that require more human, interface?
So there is something I want to bring up. Recently, it was confirmed that Mark Zuckerberg from Meta had said that he had spent, I think, about 16 billion a year for the metaverse. He's going to move that up to 25 billion a year in 2023, and will sustain that for until the end of the decade. And at the end of the decade, he will have spent about $250 billion on the metaverse. Now, obviously, that's a huge opportunity for Veve and the Veveverse to be able to get hundreds of billions of dollars. But are you more excited about that opportunity for Veve, or are you more concerned about what that might do for future generations spending most of their time, most of their waking hours in a place that's technically not real?
It also depends on what it is. I mean, at some level, you might look at the metaverse as just being an extension, because a lot of the things that will be in the metaverse will be things that already exist someplace else. It's not like everything in the metaverse is a non-real thing. I mean, look, I think there's been some, real concerns about, Facebook, and things of that ilk, especially amongst parents, especially amongst parents of children. But look, it is what it is, right? And I think the metaverse will attract a huge amount of people, but I don't know if spending, as much money as you want to spend generates what you ultimately want. I think there's going to be a lot of metaverses, right? And that, which one do you work with? Do you buy real estate in one or the other? What do you do?
Yeah.
It's like the original invention of the video game. So we have multiple consoles, and which one do you support? Or when you had a VHS, you had a beta. Which one did the movie studio support? Now, if anybody can create something that to be supportive, it might be Mark, right? He might be the winner of this whole game. But I really, how can I explain it? I think there's got to be some more command and control over this, so that what's being hypothesized and what's being, talked about isn't totally fake, isn't totally made up. It might be made up, but it's not lies. It's not, how do you legislate that? It's really hard, because people, if you hit people with enough of the same information over and over again, they buy into it. We've seen that movie. That's the basis of advertising, right? Frequency and reach. The more you talk about a certain product or a certain thing, and the more you can get people to watch it over and over again, it automatically becomes part of their lexicon, becomes part of what they believe. That's, frightening at some level, because can they tell between what's true and what's not true? Can they tell what's, really real and what's really not real? And I think that's where we run into a whole bunch of ethical questions, and again, with Elon Musk buying Twitter, and saying he's going to let I think open it up a little bit more, maybe allow everybody back that was really problematic. It's hard to know. Look, television always had a code of conduct, right? It always did, and even the streaming services have certain situations they have to live with in terms of governmental controls, et cetera, because of the FCC. The internet is wild, wild west. You get a computer, you can write a program, and then basically really, you can do anything you want, and I think the age demography around this thing, that you don't want 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, running around having some understanding of what they're not capable of understanding what the story is good or bad. So I think there's something done. Otherwise, I think the cat's out of the bag in terms of what's going to happen with Mark and other companies. But I also think the other thing I do think is really cool is augmented reality. I really think those things are really interesting, and I think that for instance, augmented reality, which basically does it brings you into a reality that exists, but then you're allowed to add augmented pieces to that reality. I think that's kind of cool. Like for instance, Pokemon Go or something along that lines.
Yeah.
And then artificial intelligence. Well, artificial intelligence is going to be the way we're going to solve most of the problems on this planet. Most of the new computer systems are going to be based on artificial intelligence. And I think that's, going to be very big, especially in the health field, keeping everybody healthy, education. So I think there's a lot of good things that are in this technology. I'm just not as smart as Mark, certainly. I don't know, I think he's done incredibly well. And I hope that he understands that there is by doing this, you also have an obligation to do what's right and do what is going to be helpful for humanity, not just what's going to make you a lot of money or make you, more. I was very upset about Facebook because when you read the fine print, it said anything that you put on Facebook, they own forever. That was insane to me. Wait a second. Every picture I put up on Facebook, they own. Everything I say about me, they own. I don't think people realize what that meant. And what it does mean that, that all your information is, they own. Anything you put up there, they own. And there's no reason that they can't use it for a number of different ways, right? So that's concerning to me. I think there should be some kind of ability to remove your material if you want to, if you don't want to be up there, and that's not in perpetuity.
But I'm glad you brought up originally Legacy Media's code of conduct, where you had Walter Cronkite, where everyone would go and watch every night, and then more recently this century you had Peter Jennings. But nowadays Legacy Media is quickly becoming fossils because of their pandering, a lot of misinformation's out there, and just general poor integrity. And now Veve has an opportunity to become a media outlet if they so choose. We already have photo sharing on the news feed. What else do you think that Veve could implement that would help put them in competition with Legacy Media if they wanted to?
Again, I can't speak for them to make sure we're clear on that. But I think obviously, one of the big opportunities for Veve is becoming promotional with brands. That the idea that, I loved it when they were offering Disney NFTs, and then if you bought one, you got a free subscription to Disney Plus. I think that was a great idea, and I think that's where where Facebook made all their money is on advertising, right? And if they didn't have the viewership, they wouldn't have had the advertising. So I think with Veve, I think it's a similar business model. That NFTs or digital collectibles are made for promotional opportunities. And I think the combination of a digital and a real one, or not a real one, a physical one, is a really big opportunity. So I think Veve, I don't think Veve, knowing David, I don't think David's going to do anything that's not, that's going to be harmful. I don't think that's going to be his bag. But you have to also have a responsibility. Have a responsibility to, to the public and to the, in whatever you do. And I think he's an opportunity to do a lot of things. I love the idea of, if Veve, again, becoming more promotional. I love the idea of Veve becoming a little bit more like where you can put up your own NFTs and sell them, maybe, and then, work with Veve in that system. I think there's a lot of ways to go with it, and I think they're looking at all of them. I think they have no reason not to. But I really think that the advertising model Because again, you think about ultimately the advertising has become such an important segue in terms of how businesses make money. I think the advertising model or the partnership model for Veve, which they're doing, but they can do. Hopefully, they'll do more.
So in the last couple of months, or I guess since I've been collecting Pokemon cards, which is years back, there are certain people that have been looking for signatures, whether it's Mitsuhiro Arita or Ken Sugimori. Mitsuhiro Arita's signature usually commands a doubling of what the card would go for. Ken Sugimori, easily you can add a 0 to whatever the normal price is. And you've signed a couple of Pokemon cards, and right now there's not enough data for me to find the value of it because I don't know how many you've signed, and two, the people that have your signature on their Pokemon cards, they just won't sell. Is there any way you could estimate how many Pokemon cards you have sold, or how many Pokemon cards you have signed over the last 25 years?
Oh, none. The first ones I ever signed was at Comic-Con. That's the first ones I ever signed. I never thought about it. Even if I thought about it, I'm not sure I would have done it. But a couple of people brought some Pokemon cards to Comic-Con, and I signed a couple of those. But I've never made it a business of signing Pokemon cards. And maybe I should. I'm not, I haven't given it a lot of thought. What I'm thinking about for my foundation, actually, what I am thinking about. So I started a foundation 21 years ago called the First Responders Children's Foundation, which has become a national organization. It helps first responders and their kids. I was thinking of doing a fundraiser where if you give a certain amount of money, I'll send you a signed Pokemon card. Yeah. Something along that lines. But as far as any other area of it, I haven't really conjured up that thought. It's kind of, to me, it's like somewhat kind of ludicrous. It sounds like it's kind of funny. It's like, who the hell am I? I'm nobody. So why would the hell want my signature? And maybe I underestimate that. But there's no question. Like I have things that I'm not a collector. I have a couple of things I've collected. So I have in my office I have the original art from Thundercats. A picture that was the original art, which I like that because it was the original piece of art that generated Thundercats. Or I have some of the original stuff like that. But I think that I would really like to, I'll investigate that. I don't have any information on it right now, and I don't know if I'm, smoking dope. but if they can, if somebody wants to help me with that, and think there's an audience, I would look at it.
So I don't know if you know this about me. One of my businesses, I had two before I just got into YouTube, was buying and selling high-end Pokemon cards. It was either Blaine's Charizard, a base set, all first edition, all PSA 10. Sold most of them for a trophy Kangaskhan card that was only given out in May of 1998, and through that, I was able to tell, okay, Mitsuhiro Arita's signature would usually double the price of a card,
right,
or Ken Sugimori's signature would add a 0 to it.
Right.
If you're telling me you signed less than a dozen cards, that's a good 25 or 30x, and there's no wonder that people are not selling their cards that you sign, because I've tried to buy them because that's what I do, and most of it, even that trophy Kangaskhan, which I paid a record price point of 80 grand, I sold for more than 3x to buy Omi, because mostly because of you, because I believe in this project, and I watched all the videos of David and Dan, but you telling me that literally just blew my mind. And the audience is going crazy.
Well, again, I think if you want to, I'm an entrepreneur, so if you're interested in doing something, we could certainly give it a whack and see how it works, but Yu-Gi-Oh, don't forget Yu-Gi-Oh, I did that too. And and another funny bit was Yu-Gi-Oh cards at the time were more popular than Pokemon. Not today, but Yu-Gi-Oh cards at the time, when I first did both of them at the same time, we were selling many more Yu-Gi-Oh cards than we were selling Pokemon cards. And that was the reason how I met David. If you know the story, I gave him, he was in New Zealand, and I gave him the rights to sell Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards in New Zealand and Australia. I didn't know he was 17 years old at the time. Didn't know that, but that's how we first met. So look, anything you think there's some opportunity, I'm certainly interested to hear it.
We'll definitely talk off camera. I know you only have an hour. You only have a couple minutes left, so I'll leave you with this. There throughout your life, you've lived through man walking on the moon. You've lived through video chats becoming available via satellite, and now blockchain. Out of all the technologies you've seen in your day, which do you believe to be the greatest technology?
Wow. Wow. That's a really good question. And I think the game changer, to be honest with you,
Mhm.
has been the internet and all the things that equate to it. And because it opened up a whole new variable that never ever existed before. And that goes on, when I say internet, I'm also talking about smartphones. I'm talking
Yeah.
about, because the idea of putting a computer in your pocket, which, the computer power in a smartphone was probably as much as was in the IBM 360s, 20 years ago, a room full of computer power.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the biggest game changer, in terms of everything you could possibly think of, whether it be, really a amazing thing. So my feeling is, because that's like, so you think about, the gasoline engine, right? You think about that. You think about, electricity. Well, the internet and all the iterations of it, it's really been a game changer in terms of, both good and bad. Both good and bad. Randy, both good and bad.
Well, I want to thank you for your time so much. This has been amazing. I'm going to be a little selfish and take some of the rest of the time just to talk to you off camera, because I know you don't have a ton. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the people before we end the broadcast?
Yeah, I would like to say, this sounds so corny. Be yourself and be kind to you. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to other people. You don't have to be something you're not. Be what you are, because everybody's got a special, innate personality, a special, innate, thing. I would definitely feel that that's what I would, recommend anybody listening to this. And I really appreciate the time, Randy. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity. I really enjoy talking about you and about this material, because, I've seen the movie. I mean, with the foundation, which, we've helped hundreds of thousands of kids. And, the only thing in this world that we have are children. I mean, when you think about it, when everything is said and done, the children are the only ones that, that really matter. And yet we don't hear about what's being done for them enough. So I think that's something that I feel very strong about.
Thank you so much. This means so much to me. This video will probably go down in history as just because, like you said, you don't do a ton of these. We have people saying protect this national treasure when talking about you.
Oh my goodness.
So like I said, I'll hang on. I'll talk to you off camera for a little bit.
Okay.
But thank you so much for coming on, everyone. Thank you for supporting and watching. Everyone say goodbye to Dashi back there, and I'll talk to you all later. And
Okay, great.